19 minutes past 1 on the freezing morning of December 19th, 1944, the fog over Stoumont Station clung to the valley like a living thing. Frost glazed the steel inside a Sherman turret where 18-year-old Harry Miller waited in the loader's seat, listening for engines he had never heard in real combat. Somewhere beyond the white curtain, German Panthers were already on the move. And Miller, no battles, no kills, hands still blackened from wrench work, was expected to help stop them. 18 hours earlier, his battalion had possessed not a single operational tank. 3 machines dragged from a deserted depot, rebuilt with burned-out parts and cold fingers, now stood between the SS Spearhead and the highway to the Meuse. If those Panthers reached the river, the Allied armies would split apart like ice under weight. 3 scrapyard Shermans. 1 narrow road. 30 minutes that would decide whether the Bulge widened or broke. How did these patched-together machines hold the most feared armored unit Germany had left? We return to that valley, minute by minute. If stories like this matter to you, stay with us. WW2 Recorder shares the chapter's history almost forgot. Cold air gathered over the Ardennes like a lid in mid-December 1944. Snow crusted the forest floor, and the long ridges of the Ambleve Valley turned narrow roads into funnels where sound traveled farther than sight. The German attack that erupted on December 16th did not begin with warning, it began with shock. Kampfgruppe Peiper smashed through the American front with 58 panzers and more than 5,000 SS troops, burning fuel and ground at a pace few had seen since 1940. 3. U.S. divisions collapsed in 72 hours. The valley offered Peiper a direct path west, and the Meuse River lay only a day's march beyond that. For First Army headquarters at Spa, the threat was painfully simple. If Peiper reached the Meuse bridges, the Allied front would split north and south. British and Canadian forces would be cut off. Resupply lines would twist, rupture, and leave Eisenhower staring at a crisis measured not in miles, but in consequences. Terrain alone would not stop Peiper. Neither would weather. Only armored resistance placed directly in his path could slow him long enough for reinforcements to form. But on the morning of December 18th, the 740th Tank Battalion had no such armor. For 18 months, Lieutenant Colonel George Rubel's Daredevils had trained in Arizona as a searchlight battalion, an experiment First Army soon abandoned. They were promised a full issue of M4 Shermans by January, but promises meant little in a winter when entire sectors were collapsing. The battalion had 9 borrowed tanks for training, nothing more. When the German offensive exploded, those 9 tanks were reassigned immediately to another unit. Rubel looked across his motor pool and saw only 3 M5 Stuarts and 2 assault guns light vehicles, with little hope against Panthers or Tigers. The Ardennes demanded medium armor, not speed. Stuarts were fast on open ground, but their thin armor turned them into liabilities inside an ambush-prone valley. Against a Panther, they were targets, not fighters. Then a forgotten fact surfaced at headquarters. The vehicle depot at Fremont, little more than a cluster of sheds and salvage piles, might still hold machinery that could be coaxed back to life. Orders arrived at 12:45 p.m. on December 18th. Move to the depot. Take whatever can be made to run. Get it ready for combat. Do not wait for instruction. Captain James Barry and Company C rolled toward the depot at 1400 hours, mechanics and tools in tow. What they found painted a clear picture of the war's pace. Meals sat half-eaten on tables. The office lights were still on. 25 hulks lay scattered across the yard, burned, stripped, or half-cannibalized for parts. Only 3 tanks sat in the ready line, though none were ready for anything. One was a duplex-drive amphibious Sherman with no breech block, no radio, and all 3 machine guns missing. Another was a gutted M36 tank destroyer, unfamiliar to the men assigned to it. 2 M24 Chaffies, straight from demonstration duty, came with no crew trained to operate them. Everything smelled of cold steel, drained oil, and urgency. But the Ardennes did not grant delays. Through that entire night, under blackout conditions and temperatures that froze grease on contact, the Daredevils worked without pause. They scavenged a breech block from a burned-out Sherman. They found machine guns on a half-track whose suspension had shattered. Radios were patched with wires that would rattle loose under vibration if not secured. Hydraulic fluid bled from traverse systems. Ammunition, pulled from forgotten storage crates, carried faded markings and uncertain stability. The technical limits were obvious. These Shermans could fire, but crewmen would need muscle to traverse turrets manually if hydraulics failed. Radios might cut out mid-order. Engines rebuilt from mismatched parts could seize if pushed too hard on steep inclines. Importantly, the valley road allowed no room to turn vehicles, were committed to the direction they faced. If a Sherman stalled, the column behind it stalled. If one burned, the entire route might close. Yet, the design principles of the Sherman modular construction, standardized parts, interchangeable components were why these machines could be resurrected in a single night. That was the quiet advantage of American industry. Tanks built not only to fight but to be repaired quickly by soldiers in the field. At 200 hours on December 19th, barely an hour before Miller took his position, 3 Shermans and the lone M36 stood ready enough. Their engines coughed into life after hard cranking. Their guns could traverse, though sluggishly. Their radios hissed, but responded. They were not ideal, not even standard, but they could move, and they could fire, and that was all the situation allowed. 12 miles west, Peiper's Panthers were out of fuel. Their greatest weakness, fuel consumption faster than supply trucks could deliver, had become a tactical hinge. American intelligence reported that fuel convoys were already on the way from Germany. Once Peiper refueled, nothing short of reinforced divisions could stop him from reaching the Meuse. Only the thin line of American defenders in the Ambleve Valley stood between him and the open road. By dawn on December 19th, the riflemen of the 119th Infantry had dug in around Stoumont Station. 8 towed 3-inch guns covered the approaches. Fog reduced visibility to 75 yards. The valley walls echoed with distant engines the men could not yet see. They knew the attack was coming. They simply did not know how many vehicles would emerge or when. Into that uncertainty rolled Company C and its patched-together machines, climbing carefully along a road no wider than a farmhouse driveway, the river on one side, a cliff on the other. Their margin for error was measured not in yards, but inches. Every calculation pointed to disaster, but these were the tanks America had in that moment. And the moment would not wait. Dawn crept slowly into the Ambleve Valley on December 19th, though no one at the front could see it. Fog clung to the road in heavy folds, drifting between the trees, swallowing sound in some moments and amplifying it in others. Lieutenant Charles Powers stood in his turret at 0345, the chill biting into his face as he scanned the whitening mist ahead. His Sherman crawled at walking speed. Behind him, 3 more tanks, Miller's among them, followed in single file, engines rumbling against the steep rock wall on their left. The river churned dark and fast on their right, only 40 feet below. For 400 yards, then 500, the road remained empty. No shadows, no movement, no silhouettes of German armor, only the valley echoing their engines back at them. Miller sat hunched beside the loader's rack, bracing himself against every bump. The driver beside him gripped the controls so tightly that the knuckles showed white through his gloves. 6 days in Belgium. No combat. No chance to learn by mistake. At 600 yards, visibility thinned slightly. Pale light seeped through the fog, enough for Powers to see 100 yards ahead. The road curved sharply around an outcrop of jagged rock. Beyond that bend lay Stoumont Station, the granite building that controlled the valley floor. Powers eased forward. The moment he rounded the curve, a long shadow broke from the fog. A Panther, fully camouflaged with brush, its 75mm gun pointing directly down the road. The German crew had chosen their ground wisely. Hull down, concealed, perfectly angled to destroy any tank that dared to approach. But Powers' gunner, Corporal Jack Ashby, reacted first. His armor-piercing round slammed into the Panther's mantlet at a clean perpendicular angle. The shell deflected downward, punching through the driver's compartment. Flames burst through the turret seam as ammunition inside began to cook off in violent, cracking pops that echoed through the valley. 4 German crewmen bailed out 2 rolling on the ground, their uniforms on fire. Powers pushed forward. Miller's tank followed, turret traversing left to watch the tree line. They advanced 150 yards past the burning Panther before the fog swallowed the wreck behind them. Then Powers saw the second one. A Panther sat hull down behind a stone wall to the left of the road crew, fully alert after watching their comrades burn. Ashby fired again. His shell gouged a deep scar across the Panther's lower glacis, but failed to penetrate. The German turret began to swing toward Powers' tank. Then Powers heard the worst possible words inside a Sherman. Gun jammed. A spent casing had lodged sideways in the breech. Ashby could not fire. The Panther's gun completed its traverse. Powers braced for the hit. But Staff Sergeant Charlie Lupi, driving the newly acquired M36 tank destroyer, swung into view from third position. He had never fired a 90mm gun before. His gunner, Corporal William Beckman, had never aimed one. But Beckman had 3 seconds. One shot punched through the Panther's front plate as if it were papier-mâché. Second shot tore through the turret ring. Third shot hit ammunition storage. The explosion lifted the Panther's turret 6 feet into the air before dropping it back at an angle. No one escaped. Ashby cleared his jam. Powers resumed the lead. They moved forward another 150 yards as daylight strengthened. At 6:30, the third Panther emerged only partially visible over a low wall, gun tube and upper glacis protruding through branches. Ashby fired once more. His round struck the Panther's muzzle brake dead center, shattering it, then traveled down the barrel and detonated like a charge inside a pipe. The steel split open in petals. The German crew abandoned their tank at once. The weapon was useless. By 6:35, the field fell silent. In exactly 30 minutes, 3 patched-together Shermans and 1 borrowed M36 had broken the sharpest point of the SS spearhead. Stoumont Station was back in American hands. But no one mistook this for victory. Peiper still held Stoumont Village 2 miles east, with more than 50 operational tanks. And at dawn the next day, he would counterattack. The night of December 19th gave little rest. Temperatures plunged to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice formed on the inside of turret walls. Anyone touching bare metal felt the burn. Miller curled into the loader's position, huddled against another crewman for warmth as the 3 destroyed Panthers crackled in the darkness, rounds cooking off inside their ruined hulls. More tanks arrived from Fremont after midnight. Mechanics worked by flashlight, calibrating sights, installing radios, and replacing hoses stiff from the cold. Artillery crews dug gun pits with picks that clanged against frozen soil. Ammunition handlers hauled crate after crate toward the ready racks. By dawn, on December 20th, Company C fielded 14 Shermans, still badly outnumbered, but no longer fighting with scraps alone. Fog remained thick. Rain mixed with sleet. At 0600, First Lieutenant John Calloway led 2nd Platoon up the rising road toward Stoumont. The terrain now favored defenders. Stone walls lined the slope. Farmhouses offered concealment. Every barn could hide a Panther. At 0620, Calloway spotted his first target, a Panther hull down behind a wall. His gunner fired an armor-piercing round that entered cleanly through the muzzle and detonated inside, peeling the gun tube open in a shower of twisted metal. The crew abandoned the tank immediately. 2 SS half-tracks fell in the next 10 minutes. Then, at 0640, the ground erupted. Staff Sergeant Homer Tompkins' Sherman rolled into a minefield laid overnight. The first blast threw 18 track sections skyward. Before the driver could brake, a second mine detonated under the opposite track. Both sides blew free of the sprockets. The tank sat disabled, blocking the entire advance. MG-42s opened fire from concealed positions. Tompkins popped his hatch, jumped into the ditch, and sprinted through snapping rounds. His crew followed through the escape hatch. All 5 reached cover unharmed, but the road remained closed. American infantry began clearing Targnon by noon, fighting house to house. Miller's Sherman provided covering fire from behind a stone barn, the turret filling with heat as the gun fired round after round, high explosive shells bursting through windows and door frames where machine gun crews might hide. Sweat and frost coexisted in the cramped metal space. By mid-afternoon, U.S. forces reached the outskirts of Stoumont. They pushed into Street Edward Sanatorium, a fortress-like brick structure on high ground with commanding fields of fire. But Peiper understood the value of that hill. At 2300 hours, between 50 and 100 SS Panzer Grenadiers struck the building with overwhelming force. Grenades rolled through doorways. Panzerfausts fired at point-blank range. Screams carried down the slope. By midnight, the Americans were forced out, tumbling into the darkness below. The SS held the heights. The road ahead was lost. Miller's Sherman sat at the base of the cliff, unable to elevate the gun enough to help. Every burst of automatic fire from above echoed through the metal hull. At 0400 on December 21st, Lieutenant David Oglinski attempted to retake the position. He advanced through darkness until a hidden anti-tank gun opened fire. 3 shells struck in rapid succession. Flames erupted from the Sherman. The crew bailed as 2 German panzers destroyed 2 more Shermans within half a minute. 4 tanks burned. The road was blocked entirely. Rubel saw one truth at dawn. His battalion could neither advance nor retreat. The Sanatorium commanded everything. Then he spotted the self-propelled 155mm howitzer newly arrived with divisional artillery. He took it on the spot. By 0800, the massive gun sat on a hillside overlooking Street Edwards, firing direct at the walls high-explosive rounds, smashing brick, punching through windows, collapsing floors. 50 shells in steady rhythm. The Germans inside endured the bombardment, but refused to yield. That night, Captain Barry found another way. He crawled around the entire cliff face and discovered a point where a makeshift road might be forced upward. Working under darkness with volunteers, engineers laid a corduroy track from felled trees and empty shell casings. Recovery crews dragged away the burned-out Shermans under smoke cover. By dawn on December 22nd, Barry maneuvered a platoon of Shermans directly against the Sanatorium walls. They fired through windows at point-blank range high-explosive shells, detonating inside rooms where SS troops had barricaded themselves. Machine gun bursts swept the upper floors. Infantry stormed the entrance. By noon, the building was back in American hands. Nearly 250 civilians, many children, emerged dazed from the basement where they had hidden for 3 days. The line broke for Peiper soon after. Powers and Lupi destroyed 2 more German tanks, one a Panther, the other a captured American Sherman pressed into SS service. The remaining German forces fled east toward L'Église, pursued by coordinated advances from the 119th Infantry and Combat Command B of the 3rd Armored Division. By nightfall, American forces had advanced 2,000 yards. The Daredevils had lost 5 tanks and suffered 6 wounded. Not a single man had been killed. Peiper, surrounded, fuel-starved, and pounded by relentless artillery, had reached the end of his drive. His elite formation, which had pierced deeper into Allied lines than any German unit since 1940, now faced only one option: abandon everything and run. The night after Stoumont Station felt longer than the battle itself. Inside the Sherman, metal contracted with sharp ticks as temperatures fell toward 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Breath crystallized in the air. Miller curled into the loader's position, knees drawn up, trying not to let his skin touch the frozen steel. Every few minutes, a round inside one of the wrecked Panthers cracked in the distance, echoing across the valley like a warning that the fight was not finished. Sleep came in fragments, never in rest. The loader pressed against him for warmth, the 2 of them sharing body heat in a space barely wide enough for one. Engines from distant tanks rumbled through the fog. Somewhere uphill, infantry dug into frozen ground, clearing snow from foxholes with helmets because shovels would not break the frost. Morning brought no relief, only work. Miller's hands stiffened around the heavy 105mm shells he passed to the gunner. Each round thudded into place with the same rhythm: pull from the rack, cradle the weight, lift with numb fingers, ram it home, secure the breech. Tap on the shoulder. Fire. Repeat. Hours blurred into that pattern until his arms shook. Even inside the turret, the cold crept between layers of wool and canvas. Outside the tank, riflemen moved through the woods with faces gray from exhaustion. Some had fought for 3 days without warm food. Others carried blankets taken from abandoned farmhouses, the fabric stiff with frost. Their boots slapped through slush that had frozen overnight, then softened in the morning sleet. They spoke little, talking wasted heat. In the hamlet of Targnon, Miller saw medics guide wounded men toward aid stations marked by strips of red cloth tied to doors. A corporal with both hands bandaged asked for water in a whisper. Snow drifted through shattered roofs, settling onto bodies the living stepped around. War took on its quiet shape here: no speeches, no music, only breath, mud, and the strange calm of people doing their jobs because stopping was not an option. Civilians emerged from cellars near Street Edward Sanatorium after the building was retaken, children blinking in the pale light, mothers clutching them as if the air outside might break. They had been trapped for 3 days, listening to grenades roll across floors above them. A little girl stared at the tanks as if they were animals made of smoke. Miller understood then how thin the line was between soldier and survivor. He thought of warmth not as comfort but as possibility. Warm engines starting on the first try, warm hands moving quickly, warm food reaching infantry before another attack. Small things that kept men alive. And as he settled back into the turret for the next push, He felt the familiar weight of a shell in his hands, the closest thing to certainty he had in a world collapsing around him. From a broader American vantage point, the fight at Stoumont was not simply a clash of tanks on a narrow Belgian road. It was the moment when the strategic logic of Allied warfare confronted the mechanical limits of German ambition, an intersection of doctrine, supply, and industrial endurance. The United States had built its armored forces around reliability and logistics. Germany, by contrast, had built its war around machines that performed brilliantly on paper, but demanded fuel, skilled maintenance, and perfect conditions rarely found in winter combat. Peiper's column illustrated this contradiction with painful clarity. His Panthers and Tigers carried some of the most powerful guns ever mounted on armored vehicles, yet every mile they traveled consumed precious fuel his supply lines could not match. When American engineers blew bridges or when road congestion slowed the advance, his tanks became liabilities, steel giants starved by their own appetite. Once cut off from fuel, no amount of armor thickness or firepower could restore momentum. The American approach told a different story. The 3 Shermans revived at Fremont Depot were not better tanks than the Panthers they faced, but they were repairable. They belonged to a system that prized interchangeable parts, standardized tools, and the ability of ordinary mechanics to patch a machine together overnight. When Allied command needed armor on the line, the answer did not depend on factories thousands of miles away. It depended on the hands of soldiers who could turn broken vehicles into fighting machines. That philosophy is what allowed the United States to respond across multiple fronts simultaneously. While the daredevils fought in the Ambleve Valley, American air power was striking German marshalling yards, British forces were holding the northern shoulder of the Bulge, and Soviet armies were pushing relentlessly toward the Oder. The global arc of the war was tightening around Germany, but actions like Stoumont ensured that the enemy could not rupture the Allied line one last time. For older Americans watching the story today, the lessons resonate in familiar ways. Victory did not come from the loudest weapon or the thickest armor, but from systems that worked under pressure, supply chains that held, crews that adapted, and commanders who made decisions rooted in practicality rather than prestige. Stoumont proved that courage mattered, but logistics determined outcomes. And as the world watched the Ardennes offensive unfold, it became clear that Germany's last gamble had failed. The Meuse remained in Allied hands. The Northern and Southern armies stayed connected. The final collapse of the Reich became not a possibility but an eventuality. In that sense, what Miller and his battalion achieved in those narrow, icy valleys echoed far beyond Belgium. Their stand ensured that the great currents of global strategy remained in motion, carrying the Allies toward the war's end. By the afternoon of December 24th, the valley that had echoed with engine noise and gunfire only days earlier lay strangely quiet. La Glisse smoldered. Panther hulls, some still warm from internal explosions, leaned at odd angles in the snow. Burned Tigers sat frozen where their crews had abandoned them, and scattered along the roads were the remnants of a formation that had once been the sharpest armored spearhead Germany possessed. Kampfgruppe Peiper, 9 days earlier, 5,800 strong with 58 tanks, had been reduced to roughly 800 exhausted men fleeing on foot through American lines. What stopped them was not a large armored division, nor an entrenched field army, but a battalion that began the offensive with no tanks at all. For the 740th Tank Battalion, the numbers told a story both stark and astonishing. In 3 days of fighting around Stoumont and La Glisse, they lost 5 tanks and suffered 6 wounded, but not a single man was killed. Their actions blocked the farthest German penetration of the Bulge and sealed off Peiper's remaining escape routes. Had the SS reached the Meuse River, the winter campaign in Europe could have stretched into months, with consequences echoing all the way to the Allied High Command. Yet Stoumont was not their final fight. The daredevils pressed forward into January, supporting the 8th Infantry Division, then the 63rd, then the 86th. While infantry units rotated for rest, the tankers moved without pause, always on the road, always under orders, always at the edge of someone's offensive. Miller learned to sleep while the Sherman jolted over frozen ground, learned to eat between shell bursts, learned the rhythm of the 105mm gun until the motion felt like muscle memory rather than thought. By late March, they crossed the Rhine on a pontoon bridge that rolled like a heaving deck beneath the weight of each vehicle. In April, they helped reduce the Ruhr pocket, where German resistance sputtered into desperation. At one captured airfield, Miller watched Luftwaffe pilots attempt to take off under artillery fire, only for the assault guns to destroy plane after plane before the wheels left the ground. It was a one-sided exchange that marked the fading edge of German air power. On April 30th, the battalion crossed the Elbe River at Blechted, the crossing unopposed. Beyond it lay the path to the Baltic, where the final fragments of the Reich were collapsing under pressure from both east and west. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Miller sat atop his Sherman, under a gray northern sky, trying to understand what the word finished meant after 138 days of continuous combat. He felt the ringing in his ears, the ache in his hands, the strange quiet settling across Europe. He was 19 years old. The battalion's final ledger was sobering: 43 men killed, 57 tanks lost. But in exchange, they destroyed 69 enemy tanks, including 17 Tigers and King Tigers, smashed or captured more than 700 enemy vehicles, shot down or destroyed 264 aircraft, and breached the Siegfried Line twice under 2 different armies. They achieved all of this while serving under 4 U.S. field armies, the 1st Allied Airborne Army and the British 2nd Army. Few independent tank battalions matched such an operational record, and yet, after the war, little was said about them. Historical memory flowed instead toward Bastogne, toward the paratroopers who held the surrounded town, toward Patton's dramatic relief drive from the south. Movies were made, monuments built, books written. Stoumont remained a footnote, its significance overshadowed by other, louder chapters of the Bulge. In 1998, veterans of the 740th raised a memorial at Baus, Arizona, where the unit had trained. In 1999, the Belgian town of Neufchâteau dedicated a monument with all 800 names engraved on its surface. Fewer than a dozen veterans were still alive to attend. They stood beside Belgian families who remembered the winter when desperate American tankers stopped the SS in the snow. Harry Miller lived quietly after retirement, private investigator, hospital security director, safety inspector, jazz drummer in his late 60s. He rarely spoke about the war. Most daredevils didn't. They had returned home, raised families, found work, and carried the weight of years in silence. Only late in life did Miller give interviews, describing cold engines, improvised repairs, the clatter of spent casings in a Sherman turret. When asked how he felt about his service, he answered simply, he was proud and he would do it again. He passed away in 2017 at 89 years old. The 740th Tank Battalion was officially deactivated on July 23, 1946. But their legacy remains in quiet places: a memorial stone in the Arizona heat, a monument in a Belgian town, the names etched into metal and granite, and the memory of 3 hastily repaired Shermans facing down the best armored regiment Germany had left. The great battles of the war often overshadow smaller ones, but history is shaped as much by narrow roads and fog-covered valleys as by famous cities and grand offensives. Stoumont stands as proof. 3 tanks assembled in one desperate night altered the course of the Ardennes, and with it, the path to victory in Europe. When we look back, we remember not only the machinery but the hands that worked it, the loader passing shells in the cold, the mechanic tightening bolts with numb fingers, the commander scanning fog for a muzzle flash. Ordinary men who became extraordinary simply because the moment required it. If stories like this help keep their memory alive, then we ask you to stay with us. WW2 Secret Archives preserves the chapters almost lost to time stories of tankers, mechanics, riflemen, and civilians who carried history on their backs. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us whose name you remember. And thank you for ensuring that Harry Miller and the Daredevils do not disappear into silence.